you know, we haven't devolved from the common ancestor with rats from an evolutionary perspective that long ago. I mean, like, it's millions of years ago, you know, but it's short compared to how long ago we devolved, let's say, from, or devolved, I think that's good enough, from amphibians. And so we're a lot like rats, man, and we have the same skeletal structure, and our brains are quite similar, and the neurochemistry is very, very, very similar. I mean, the neurochemistry is similar right down to the level of crustaceans, which is why I wrote about lobsters in Rule 1, because I thought it was so bloody amazing when I came across that literature to see that when lobsters are defeated in a social contest and they lose their hierarchical position, that they undergo neurochemical changes that are analogous to the neurochemical changes that human beings undergo. That's so amazing. And that the same damn drugs that help us, antidepressants essentially, also cheer up defeated lobsters. I mean, it's a staggering demonstration of the continuity of biology across, you know, unbelievable spans of time. You know, critics have complained that I cherry-picked the data, but they don't know what the hell they're talking about. So they don't. I studied the serotonin system for a very, very long time, and I know perfectly well that one of the things that it does is monitor your position in a social hierarchy. And it's more important than that, because the serotonin system it's a master control neurochemical system. It's like the conductor of an orchestra. Everything in your brain depends on the serotonin system, which is why you think about it like an antidepressant decreases the rate at which neurons will reuptake serotonin. You need serotonin to modulate the way your neurons work. You take an antidepressant and the serotonin works a little longer. Okay, so what's the consequence of that? Well, let's say you're depressed. Okay, we got to think about being depressed for a minute. So when you're depressed, this is what happens. All you remember about the past is what's negative. So everything about the past is negative. All you can see in the present is what's negative. Everything about the present is negative. And nothing about the future is positive at all. And so that's interesting, because it means that something has shifted inside you, let's say neurophysiologically, that changes the way you view everything. Everything. Your entire past, the present, and the entire future. And what it essentially does is exaggerate negative emotion to a tremendous degree, that's depression, and suppress positive emotion. Now, there can be variance in that. Sometimes you see depressed people, and you can think about your own mood in this way. You know, you might say, well, I'm not that sad, but I've just sort of lost my interest in everything. Okay, so that means that what's happened is your positive emotion system has been suppressed, because the positive emotion system is what gives you that interest in things, that pulls you forward to action, okay? And the negative emotion system, that's anxiety, that's a huge part of it. Frustration, disappointment, grief, pain, that kind of covers it. Anger as well, though anger is a bit complicated because it's half a positive emotion and half a negative emotion, which is why it feels so good to get angry, by the way, and why it also impels you to action, whereas most negative emotions stop you. You know, so in any case, if your serotonin system, if your serotonin function declines, then all of a sudden everything is negative. You think, well, isn't that interesting? How the hell can it be that something can change within you that changes everything? And the answer has to be, well, it must be a fundamental system that's been changed, right? Because if it changes everything, it has to be a system on which all other systems depend. And that is the case with the serotonin system. And that's really worth knowing, especially when you also know that the serotonin system counts where you are in the social hierarchy. And so there's this weird kind of one-to-one correspondence. Imagine a social hierarchy has 10 levels. I don't care what hierarchy you're in. Most people's hierarchies are actually quite small. They sort of consist of the people that they compare themselves to. You know, which is a strange thing, too, because one of the things that you see happening with really successful people is they actually don't get a lot happier and a lot less unhappy as they climb the broad social ladder, because the people they compare themselves to change. And so I can tell you a funny story about this. So I know this guy. I worked with him for a long time. His name is Adeo Resi. And he's a hell of a guy. He's like 6'7", and he's like really charismatic. And he's been pretty successful. He built this company in San Francisco called Founder Institute. And it's only one of many things he's done. And it's operating in 165 cities. It's a school to teach people how to be entrepreneurs. He's trying to export Silicon Valley, what would you call it, know-how, technological and financial, to the rest of the world. And in like 5 years, he built 165 schools, not physical schools, but school-like organizations around the world. And like, go try that. Like, that's really hard, you know? Just to build one is hard, but to do that in multiple languages all over the world, it's bloody well impossible. And then at the same time, he built his organization, started 2,500 successful companies as a consequence of building this school. That's pretty good, you know? And he was having a rough time and was talking to me on the phone about, you know, he wasn't so happy about what he'd done with his life. And he said, geez, I compare myself with my roommate, and, you know, I've hardly done anything. And his roommate was Elon Musk. It's like, I just laughed at him. I thought, geez, really? That's what you're going to... You haven't done anything compared to Elon Musk, and you're depressed about it. It's like, yeah, well, you and the rest of the planet. I mean, look, what did Musk what did he do? He invented an electric car. That's impossible. And then he made it work. That's impossible. And then he built an entire infrastructure to charge it, and that worked, and that's impossible. And they're good cars. And then he made them faster than any cars have ever been, and cheap, and so that's impossible. And then that wasn't good enough, so then he decided that he would compete with NASA, which is impossible, and build rockets at 1/10 the price they were building them, except bigger. And then he would shoot his car on his rocket out into space. Right. And he did all that. And it's like Adeo was thinking, oh, I've hardly done anything with my life. It's like, oh. So, but my point is that, you know, primates of our type sort of have a group size that we think about as our group of about 200 people. So like on Facebook, for example, the probability that you're in something approximating reasonable, constant communication with more than 200 people is low. You just don't have the time, and you can't keep track of it. So our natural group is something like 200, and our groups tend to fragment when they get bigger than that. And that's also associated, by the way, with cortical size. You see this in primates, is that as primates develop larger brains, the group size that they seem to be able to manage also increases. And that might be part of the reason why they develop larger brains. Who knows? But anyways, it's about 200 people. And the problem is that as you get more successful, say, in the global hierarchy of 100 million people, the 200 people that you compare yourself changes. And so that you end up with $100 million, and you're not very happy because your $50 million yacht is like 20 feet shorter than your friend's, you know, $150 million yacht. And you're high in neuroticism, so that makes you frustrated and disappointed, you know. So anyways, it's important to understand. It's the message here, the point of this is that you have a system, this serotonin system, base of your neurophysiology. It also sets your brain up during embryonic development. So it really is the master control system in many, many ways. And it counts where you are in your hierarchy. And then it decides how much positive emotion and how much negative emotion you should feel on average because of your position. And so like if you're, let's say number 1 is at the top and number 10 is at the bottom. So you're number 10, you're barely clinging to the bottom of reality. Your brain says, look, it's dangerous where you are at the bottom of the hierarchy. You don't have a lot of friends. It's precarious down there. And so that means any little thing that goes wrong, any little error you make, that might be the end of you. And so you better be on guard and alert. And if something small happens, it better hurt, because it might be the straw that breaks the camel's back. And there's nothing pleasant about that. Like, of course, why would there be? Why would there be anything pleasant about a process that magnifies everything negative you feel about anything that might be wrong. And not just on one small dimension of negative emotion, not just anxiety, which is bad enough, but anxiety and the pain-related emotions. So pain-related emotions are pain, obviously. That it generally indicates damage to a psychophysiological system, but grief is a pain-like emotion, and frustration is a pain-like emotion, and so is disappointment, and loneliness as well. Those are all pain-like emotions, and have elaborated out of an underlying pain system. And so the negative emotion system is like a tree that has branches, and each of the branches is the separate negative emotion, but they're all tied together at the root. And positive emotions are like that as well, except they're not quite as differentiated. And so if your serotonin levels fall because you've suffered a hierarchical defeat, then the positive emotion system gets flattened so that good things no longer feel good because it's dangerous to take risks, perhaps if you're at the bottom of the hierarchy and you're not doing very well, which is why you're at the bottom. Why should you have any trust in yourself? And you don't have any friends, and you're not well situated in the social world. You're not going to be enthusiastically moving forward to do new things, and so your motivation for engaging in life declines, and it can decline pretty much to zero. If you see people who are seriously depressed, they say, well, I can't even listen to music anymore. It just sounds flat and dead. And if you talk to someone who says that about music, they're pretty damn depressed, because music is one of those things that virtually everybody always enjoys, at least one genre or another. And the depressed person will describe even that the sensory quality has changed. And then they also say they're absolutely overwhelmed with negative emotion. And so, okay, so that's a good thing. So that's a good, very interesting thing to know, is that the manner in which one of your fundamental neurochemical systems is tracking your position in a hierarchy is crucial to the maintenance of your emotional stability. Okay, so now you want to keep that in mind, because that's the first important point. Okay, so now the next thing I'm going to do is explain to you how it is that the way you look at the world is related to the emotions that I just described. And then I'm going to talk about how that in itself is related to the idea of hierarchy. And we're going to explore from there. So when you look at the world, you think that the world is made of obvious objects, and that you look at them, and then you think about what they are, and then you think about how you evaluate them, and then you think about how you use them, and then you decide to act. And that's not the case, because the world doesn't come segregated neatly into objects. And it took people a long time to figure this out, because when you look at the world, there it is, segregated neatly into objects, right? It takes no effort at all, except it takes half your damn brain to do that. Right, and we're very visual creatures. We have great visual systems. And so a tremendous amount of metabolic energy and evolutionary expenditure of time has gone into providing us with a visual system that just breaks the world up into obvious objects for us. And that isn't even right, because we don't actually see objects. What we see are more like tools and obstacles. We just think they're objects. Like when you come in here, I can give you an example of that. Okay, think about a beanbag. Okay, think about a stump, and think about a stool. You say, those are all chairs. Okay, it's like, well, what do you mean they're all chairs? What do they have in common? Objectively speaking, a beanbag doesn't have legs. A stump is rock hard and solid. A stool is something almost completely unlike a beanbag. Well, they're all chairs. Well, why? Well, the answer is you can sit on them. And so most of the things that we group together as objects, we group together as a consequence of functional utility, and not because they share a set of features that are objectively similar. And the reason that we perceive in that manner is because we don't really care that much about the objective features of the world, because we have to care about being alive. And so what we actually care about is what things do. And so we tend to see things that do things and group together perceptually things that do things. And so, when you walk into a room like this, there is a trillion things you could look at. You could look at the color variation in the carpet forever. If you came in here on a psychedelic, you might even do that, right? Well, it's interesting because one of the things psychedelics do is they decrease the degree to which you view the world in an iconic manner. And then you see the incredible complexity that's underneath everything, and it's absolutely fascinating. Now, it's not good because you shouldn't come in here and just look at the carpet for an hour. It's not that productive unless you're trying to equate yourself reacquaint yourself with the fundamental wonder of the world, and there is some utility in that. Artists do that, but practically speaking, it's not that useful. What happens when you come in here, you have a goal in mind. You're going to watch what happens on the stage. You're going to listen, and so you only see what's relevant to that, and so what you see are chairs, and chairs are things you sit on, and so they pop up into your perceptual field just like that, and then you know what to do with the chair. You sit on it, and partly the reason you know what to do with a chair isn't because you look at the chair and you think, oh, look, a chair. Because you didn't do that when you came in here, right? There wasn't a single one of you that came in here and looked at the rows here and said, oh, look, chairs, right? It's self-evident that they're there. What happens is that you look at the chair and it maps, the chair maps itself onto your body. Like you prepare yourself, that the perception prepares you for the action. So as soon as you see the chair, which has a certain shape, so imagine it's a pattern that sustains itself in time, right? Because that's what a chair is. It's a pattern that sustains itself across time. And that pattern is transformed into a pattern of light, and then that's transformed into a pattern on your retina, and that's transferred into a pattern on your optical nerve, and then that's transferred into patterns all over your brain. And some of those patterns are the patterns that allow you to perceive the chair consciously, and some of them are patterns that enable your body to prepare to take this position in the chair, because part of what your eyes do is map right onto your motor system so that you look and you know what to do. And it makes you a lot faster, right? You look at something, you know what you're supposed to do with it, your body's prepared to do it. And that's kind of also what it means to understand something. If you look at it and you know what it is, you know how to use it, it means you can just map the thing right onto your body. And so people are very, very good at that. And especially as you develop expertise at something, you just get better and better and better at that. There are people that have certain forms of brain damage. Lermite syndrome, I think it was called, if I remember correctly, also known as utilization syndrome. And these are people who have a degeneration of the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain that organizes your behavior, I would say, at the highest level of abstraction. So when you're thinking voluntarily about what you might do, and then you go do it, it's your prefrontal cortex that's thought that up voluntarily and then organized the rest of your brain to go do it. And so it one of the things it does is inhibit all the other things you might do. So one of the things that happens to people who have prefrontal damage, especially if it's on the right-hand side, is they get very socially inappropriate because they have all sorts of whims and motivations and emotions that would normally be inhibited by attention to context, let's say, and the desire for voluntary activity, and they lose that part of the brain, and so they get disinhibited. They can get disinhibited to the point where they have to be institutionalized or jailed because they start acting so inappropriately that they can't be controlled. And so, anyways, Lermite syndrome is utilization syndrome. And one of the things that happens to people who have utilization syndrome, let's say they're in an old folks' home, maybe it's a consequence of a degenerative neurological disease, and they're walking down the hallway and there's an open door. And they walk through it. They can't help it because what do you do with a door that's open? You walk through it. Now, you don't if you're doing something else, right? But if you're not doing something else because you haven't got the part of you that is helping you do something else, then the object just tells you what to do. And you see this with little kids too, because whenever you present them with an object, they grab it right away. They often grab it and put it in their mouths. And they do that because their mouths are already wired up completely when they're born, right? Both from a sensory perspective and from a motor perspective. And so kids are always cramming things into their mouth so that they can investigate them with their tongue and map what they are. It's important for them to, well, that's how they learn about the world. And so, anyways, if you have utilization syndrome, you can't not utilize things. So you can hand someone a bottle or a cup of water who has utilization syndrome and they're not thirsty and they'll drink it because it's a cup of water. And what is that? It's not an object. It's a thing to grip and drink. You know, and it's how else can you look at this? This isn't a cliff. It's a falling off place, right? And if you're one of those strange creatures who just think it's a cliff and you know, you're, I don't know, what you're abstracted in thought and you walk off it, then you're dead. It's a lot better to perceive it as a falling off place, which is what you do because, you know what it's like. You go somewhere that's steep and you kind of play with the edge a little bit and you can feel the falling off place map itself on your whole body. It's kind of a strange, I suppose, an interesting experiment to play with that. You know, you might be back here and you think, yeah, well, that's not too bad. I wonder if I can get a little closer, you know. And maybe you can, and maybe you can get, well, maybe you can get too close, and then you're an evolutionary mistake. So, but you know, you get close enough. Maybe you peer over and you think, yeah, that's enough. And you can feel the falling off place map itself onto your body. And that's how you perceive with your emotions and your motivations and your action systems way more than you think. So it isn't object, picture on your eye, picture in your brain, thought, emotion, and then action. That's not how it works. You're representing the world at multiple levels in your nervous system at the same time. And you need to. And one of those levels is emotional. So, okay, so here goes for the emotional part. Now, look, and this is just as important as the serotonin idea, I would say, which means it's really important because the serotonin idea is really important to know that your position in the social hierarchy determines the balance between your positive and negative emotion. That's like a crucial insight into human behavior. And that we have a positive emotion system and that we have a negative emotion system and that they're separate. Those are unbelievably important discoveries, all made, by the way, virtually all made by animal experimentalists, just so you know, because they deserve some credit. So now the issue is, how is your perception related to your emotion? And so it looks like it, and this is much of this I learned from Jeffrey Gray. Now, Gray was a student of Eysenck, but he's also a student of someone named Norbert Wiener, who was a cyberneticist at MIT. He established the field of cybernetics, and he was one of the first people he was one of the founders of computational science. He was a big deal, Norbert Wiener, and his work had tremendous impact on all sorts of fields. And he was trying to figure out how to generate autonomous self-correcting systems. So let's say intelligent systems, and us among them, because we're autonomous self-correcting systems. And so Gray knew about Norbert Wiener's work, and he integrated that with Eysenck's work and then with all this psychobiology, and he came up with a lovely set of ideas that are extraordinarily useful. And so here's one of them. We live inside, we perceive, this is part of perceiving the world as a story. We perceive the world as a place to go from one location to another. So you can imagine that we're on a journey. That's our life, is a journey. And it might be a 10-minute journey. It might be a 15-minute journey. It might be the journey of a week. It might be the journey of a month or the journey of a lifetime. And, you know, maybe what you would want is that the journey of a minute and 10 minutes and a week and a month and a year culminate into the journey of a lifetime. You know, you could imagine that you would want some continuity across all that, so that there was some integrity to your existence, so that each part of what you were doing was related in some intelligible way to the whole. That would be an ideal. When you think of someone as being integrated, right, as having character, something like that, that's really what you mean. You mean that all the parts of what they do fit somehow into an integrated whole. And so that's kind of interesting to know too, because if you have a value system that's well structured, then all the little things you do are part of the big thing that you're doing, whatever that big thing is, and you are doing that big thing. Okay, so that's another thing to keep in mind. Now, so you're looking at the world. You're a creature of action. You have to be a creature of action because you have to act in order to live, because if you don't act, well, then you fall apart and you're overwhelmed by despair and negative emotion and you starve to death and you die. And so not acting, not an option. So unless you're willing to take the consequences I just described. So you better look at the world as a place to act. And so how do you act? Well, you're somewhere. You should know where you are, by the way. That's very helpful psychologically. You know, imagine you have a map, you're in a car, and you don't know where you are. You're trying to get somewhere. The map's not helpful because you don't know where you are. And so even if you know where you're going, but you don't know where you are, the map isn't useful. And the same applies, the same really does apply to your life. If you don't know where you are, it's very hard to map out where you're going. And, well, that has consequences for emotion as well, because going somewhere is actually what activates the positive emotion system. That's what it's for. The positive emotion system is to facilitate movement forward to a better place. That's its function. So that's so interesting, because it means that if you're not moving forward to a better place, then you don't have any positive emotion. And so there's another conclusion that you can derive from that too, which is that if you don't have a value system, you don't have any positive emotion. Because a value system is what posits that one thing is worth doing more than another. And if one thing isn't worth doing more than another, then you don't have any place valuable to go. And if you don't have any place valuable to go, then you don't have any positive emotion. And so so when people are criticizing hierarchies, which they do a lot, especially politically, there shouldn't be hierarchies. It's like, really, there shouldn't be hierarchies, eh? Well, how is it that you propose to look at the world? Because you look at the thing that you think is most important to look at that point. And if you couldn't, you wouldn't even know what to look at.